that the system has changed from being something that's out there, that's scary, that's big, that I don't know anything about, to something that I've had some involvement with subscriptions to content or tags or communities. The content that's then created in the environment starts getting fed back to the individual, and they get to see that real life is happening in here. The final strategy that I'll touch on briefly is one-to-one coaching. This is about observational learning about how people are working currently today, and then clearly with approval and an invitation from the person that you're coaching, the permission to give recommendations or ideas about how that work could be improved or done in new ways. So things like, did you know that you could now do this? Or have you tried doing this work process in this way? Or why are you clicking into there? All of these one-to-one coaching prompts and questions give you an opportunity to help coach people to better and more effective ways of working. And then stage 4 is the final stage in the overall framework. This is about making the new technology and the new approaches real and relevant, making it the new now way of working. One strategy in stage 4 is start doing patterns. This is where a group looks at the work that it's doing today, and perhaps that's how we review documents. Perhaps that's how we hold discussion. Perhaps that's how we find expertise. And then looking at how the group is currently working, and then the group coming up with a new way of working. So for document reviews, let's say that the group today, like many groups around the world, are sending emails with attachments that someone then has to open, review, send back, and the lead author of the document has the nightmare task of pulling all of those things together. The group says, we've seen what this new collaboration technology can do. We understand how it works. We see the relevance of it. We are now going to do document reviews in a new way, whether that's using check and check out, whether that's using an online document. As an agreement in the group, when I then turn up in a couple of days and send out an email with an attachment saying, can I have your feedback on this? The rest of the group has the permission to come back to me and say, Michael, look, we've discussed this. We don't do it like this anymore. We work in a new way. It could be the way that we hold discussions. It could be the way that we find expertise. This strategy becomes an accountability lever within the group. Another strategy in stage 4 is called internal user groups. And this is where we have people inside the organization that are supportive of the new way of working, interested in making it happen, come together on a frequent basis, a regular basis, to learn new things, to share experiences, to find other people who have already tried and succeeded in particular areas, to moan about things that aren't working and try and find a way through that. This is a great strategy for demonstrating business acceptance, business support of this, where the new technology and approaches move out from just being something that IT has introduced to the organization. The third and final strategy that I'll mention in this stage 4 is called zero other options. And this is where the new system is treated as the place to work. The meeting notes are in the new environment. The latest document version is in the new environment. Team member details are in their profile in Pulse. They're not in Excel spreadsheets anymore. This is where we work. This is how we get our work done now. If you're looking for the meeting notes, don't email them to someone. Tell them how to find them in the new environment. If someone needs to update team member details, then it's done in Pulse. It's not just done in an email to everyone. Don't make exceptions for people. Now, clearly, this is a stage 4 strategy rather than a stage 1 or a stage 0 strategy. So it's important that you've been through the previous stages and appropriate strategies before getting to here. But this is the kind of place that we need to get to. I said there were 4 things that we were going to do today. We were going to examine the situation, and in looking at that, we noted that adoption is a common challenge across many collaboration platforms and systems and environments today. Secondly, that I was going to present to you a framework for thinking about user adoption and to highlight some strategies that you could use. And I've given you the framework, and I've talked through briefly a number of strategies for this. The third thing that we were going to do today was to look at some survey results. In presenting to you a raft of strategies, it's tempting to think that that's enough, but it's not. We need to dig a bit deeper and look at what people are actually doing and at what people are finding effective across this. At the beginning of 2012, I did a survey. 186 respondents gave feedback. 105 of those were using Microsoft SharePoint. I want to show you the SharePoint data. So in terms of the respondent profile, just over 30% of respondents came from organizations of 1,000 to 5,000 people, and then just under 25% of respondents came from organizations of over 10,000. One of the early questions in the survey was, which strategies do you use for introducing new ways of working? And this is the overall slide. What we're looking for here is a high ranking on the purple. So as we go down, we see that pages on the intranet was the most frequently used strategy, followed by web-based training, followed by third equal between classroom training, embedded champion, and executive sponsorship. And if we map that on the four-stage model, we get executive sponsorship on the winning attention stage. We get all three of the strategies that I've talked about in stage 2, cultivating basic concepts. And then in stage 3, enlivening applicability, we get embedded champion. And then there's nothing in making it real. The next question in the survey said, given what you use, which ones do you find effective? And in this case, we're looking for a strong yellow, which is a strong orange, sorry, which is the strongly agree with the effectiveness of it. So as we run down the list, we get one-to-one coaching, executive sponsorship, embedded champion, easy first steps, real-to-life scenarios, and internal user group. And when we remap that on the four-stage model, we have executive sponsorship and embedded champion continuing as things that are used and effective. We have those stage 2 strategies crossed off as not being highly effective, and we get 4 new things added to the model. Real-to-life scenarios back in stage 1, very effective strategy. And enlivening applicability, one-to-one coaching and easy first steps, very effective. In stage 4, internal user group. So the summary from this, in terms of the SharePoint data, if you're using SharePoint, if you're using the executive sponsorship strategy today, if you're using the embedded champion strategy today, then keep doing that. They're very effective strategies. If you're not using one-to-one coaching, easy first steps, real-to-life scenarios, or the internal user group strategy, you have an opportunity to increase your use of those in order to increase the effectiveness of your adoption program and the value that your organization derives from new ways of working. Another slice of the data, another set of respondents out of the survey were using Yammer. 20 of the respondents gave their answers in the context of Yammer. So if we look at the organizational size, there were ties for 1,000 to 5,000 and over 10,000 at 30%, and then most of the others were in the 20%, were in the 5,000 to 10,000 size organization. We took the same approach. Which strategies are you using? And as we run down the list, again, we're looking for purple tier. We see that pages on the intranet was the most highly used strategy, followed by web-based training, followed by build it and they will come, which is also the viral adoption approach, and then executive sponsorship, and then embedded champion. And when we run this on the model, where we lay this over the model, we get executive sponsorship in stage 1, pages on the intranet and web-based training for stage 2, build it and they will come, and embedded champion for stage 3. Now clearly use and effectiveness are likely to be different, and when we asked that question, we saw that come through. So in terms of effectiveness, the most highly effective strategy was one-to-one coaching, followed by executive sponsorship, followed by embedded champion, followed by exemplar stories, followed by easy first steps. Now, before I click off this, have a look at that bottom, build it and they will come. None of the respondents strongly agreed that it was a highly effective strategy. And in terms of the green to the far right, this was the strategy that had most people saying, we strongly disagree with the effectiveness of this. And then when you combine that with the red, you had over 60% of people saying this strategy does not work. And then when we map that on the 4-stage model, we get pages on the intranet, web-based training, and build, and they will come crossed off, and we get exemplar stories added back into stage 1. We get one-to-one coaching added in stage 3. We get easy first steps added in stage 3 as well. So in terms of the organizations using YAMA, if you're using executive sponsorship, if you're using the embedded champion approach, then they are effective. Keep doing that. If you're not using one-to-one coaching, exemplar stories, easy first steps, you have an opportunity to increase your use of those. And then the final slice of the data that I'll present to you very briefly here is the IBM Connections data, because it's quite different from the SharePoint and YAMA approach. In terms of organizational size, just under 50% were at organizations of over 10,000, followed by organizations of between 1,000 and 5,000, and organizations of less than 100. In terms of use of the strategies, again, we're looking for the purples. Executive sponsorship was number 1, followed by internal user group, followed by embedded champion, followed by one-to-one coaching, followed by easy first steps. And when we put this on the model, we see that there is an executive sponsorship strategy. There's nothing in stage 2. There are 3 strategies that are used in stage 3, and there's even a stage 4 strategy that is highly used. And then when we asked about effectiveness, the IBM Connections organizations said executive sponsorship was number 1, one-to-one coaching was number 2, embedded champion was number 3, real-to-life scenarios was number 4, stop doing, start doing patterns was number 5, and easy first steps was number 6. And then when we add that back to the model, we get a continuation of some of the things that we've already seen, and we get some other things added into the model here. Real-to-life scenarios, one-to-one coaching, stop doing, start doing patterns as being highly effective ways of doing things. So the summary for organizations using IBM Connections is, if you're using executive sponsorship, embedded champion, easy first steps, keep doing that. They're effective. If you're not using one-to-one coaching, real-to-life scenarios, stop doing, start doing patterns, then start doing that. They're highly effective approaches to encouraging adoption. I presented to you the survey results, and clearly we've gone through that very quickly. I'm going to highlight now 4 case studies of organizations that have approached adoption and how they've done that. The first is a retail firm, a home improvement company with almost 2,000 stores, $50 billion in revenue. The intent in introducing a new way of working was to improve processes and bring people together. Their early adoption work in mid-2010 focused on executive sponsorship and real-to-life scenarios. The scenarios were things like, we have 2 or 3 experts in a particular topic, but they're spread across all these, across 2 or 3 firms. They never get to meet. How do we bring these people together? In terms of viral adoption, they found that viral adoption didn't work for the platform, that people needed a level of competence to see the possibilities in the new environment in order for viral adoption to work. As they moved into late 2010, executive sponsorship, they got sign-off to proceed, and a stage 3 strategy was, in their language, it was community managers, in my language, embedded champions. And then in mid-2011, they had a wonderful exemplar story called the Teflon Paint Tray, where one person in one store said, I've got this Teflon paint tray, how do I merchandise this in a great way? So they take a can of paint, they pour it in, they leave it to dry, they peel the paint mold off, and they put the perfectly clean paint tray and the paint mold on the counter. People walking in on Saturday saying, oh yuck, I've got to do painting today, I hate the cleanup, see this Teflon paint tray and say, I want one of those because I hate cleaning up. And as a result of that, and then as a result of other people hearing about it, the organization in 1 year made $1 million of additional revenue. Now, I said it's a billion-dollar company, and $1 million isn't all that much. But imagine if that started happening 100 times a year, 200 times a year, 500 times a year, that as a result of sharing local innovations that then become more widely adopted and accepted across the organization, what would that mean in terms of revenue lift? A second example is a building materials firm spread across many countries, almost 50,000 people. The intent at the building materials firm was to improve innovation and bring people together. It was introduced to the organization aligned with 6 global initiatives, championed from the very top of the organization, so very strong executive support. Each of the initiatives had an identified leader and some people across the organization that were encouraged to join and share their experiences. One initiative resulted in identifying savings of $140 million a year in a particular process as a result of people talking and sharing local innovations and local ideas that were happening, and then other people in other plants taking those on and seeing the same benefit. $140 million, great benefit. Third example is a university with almost 20,000 students spread across multiple schools. The intent or the aim for the university was to use the technology gifted to them by the vendor. In terms of the adoption strategy, they had some real-to-life scenarios, they had some executive support, but mainly it was a build it and they will come approach. And unfortunately, this faltered and failed. The academics were not interested. The new environment was not positioned in a way that made sense to current tools, such as their learning management system, and the key staff that were at the university left. And very sad to see that something that could have made a great difference didn't because of the way that it was introduced. The final case that we'll touch on briefly is a research firm. The research firm had Microsoft SharePoint in place, and many teams were using it effectively across the organization, but the HR team was very reticent to get involved. When there was a new team lead in the HR team, they said, we need to know about this. How can we make use of this? And so they used a strategy which I haven't talked about called bulk loading party. And basically it looked like this. On the Monday, they said we need to do more with SharePoint. On the Wednesday, the 7 or 8 people in the HR team, plus the information management coordinator for the organization, sat in a room together for the day, each with a computer, and over the course of the day, moved all of the appropriate documents, the contracts, the job appraisals, the warnings, the salary reviews, the most current versions of those off the file share into the new SharePoint space. They put the right metadata on it. They made sure it was classified correctly. They saw that it was there. By the end of the day, most of the material that HR team needed to work with SharePoint in an effective way was up in SharePoint and ready for them to use. And as a result of spending a day working together in a fun environment, there was some mini competitions with, who's uploaded the most documents. As a result of that, they knew how to use this thing. And the documents that they hadn't moved across, they could move very quickly after leaving the bulk loading party. We think, though, that this final statement is the most interesting one. The bulk loading party changed the HR team from the most reticent to one of my most vanguard teams. They were the ones that were then championing for how do we do more with this? How do we make better use of SharePoint in our organization? We've talked through a whole heap of things in the last 40 minutes, and I want to try and bring that together before we open for Q&A. So in summarizing what we've talked about, one opening summary statement would be the vendors have done their part. Success isn't up to the vendor. Success is up to you. That's the second summary statement. You need to plan for an effective approach. And I've outlined briefly the roadmap approach. Understand the technology, outline the vision, accept that technology is a small factor in success, determine your governance approach, engagement, adoption, and pursuing value. success at your firm is up to you, and the way that you approach this is critical. And the final summary statement that I'd make, the question that I would give to you is, what are you doing about adoption? Adoption is something that you can do a lot about. And as I've illustrated over the last 40 minutes, there's a whole variety of strategies that you can use. Clearly, you need to choose the ones that are going to work for your organization. But you can do a whole lot more in this area than just saying, hey, everyone, the technology is available. Go and do great work. So with that, we're going to go to Q&A. And I'll leave the slide up. Jason, back to you.
All right. Thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. We did have a couple of questions, but I did want to open up a couple polls here. One of the things that we want to do is gauge your level of interest in the content that was provided, as well as how you feel about potentially continuing on with this series. So if you would take a second just to do this poll, we'd really appreciate it. All right, good. So we're going to do one more poll, and the next thing that we want to know is your level of interest related to continuing this series. We really believe strongly in the details of the set of strategies. So there's a series of webinars that we want to provide to you, and we want to gauge your level of interest. So let's go ahead and do a poll. We have here, and I encourage you to use the question those answers. First was, let's see, it said company size with which strategies you choose to use. So, Michael, you want to go ahead and do you feel that if there's like depending upon the company size you're working with, do you think that the approach that you take should be altered in any way?
Well, I think company size has an impact because, clearly if you have an organization of 50 people in one building compared to 100,000 people across 200 locations in 50 countries, your approach is probably going to be different in terms of how you proceed with that. Interestingly, I've been working with a fairly large organization, between 10 and 20,000 people with locations all around the world, and as a result of presenting the User Adoption Strategies workshop internally to that organization and looking at the role of one-to-one coaching and the power of that, the senior executive in the room said, if one-to-one coaching is as effective as you say, and if it's what people want, why don't we do it? And in exploring what that would look like, they found actually that there was a way of thinking about using this strategy that was as cost-effective or even more cost-effective as classroom-based training, which was the standard way of proceeding at that organization. So I would say that organizational size does have an impact, but organizational size doesn't give you immediate permission just to say, we're just going to publish stuff on the internet and that will be enough because we have a large organization. You can actually look at this and think about this and find that other strategies that we've highlighted today can be used in an effective and cost-effective way.
Okay, great. So we have another question here, which is, I think it might actually be similar in concept, which is, what are the smaller companies using? It seems that the analysis was primarily focused on larger companies. So again, what are the smaller companies using?
I don't have that data from the survey directly to hand, so let me just think about that for a moment. And so I'm working with a smaller company at the moment, and one of the strategies that they're going to be emphasizing is executive support for the environment and seeking to transition, for example, the weekly email newsletter from the CEO through to a blog post in the new environment. So migrating from one to the other is a way of showing that this is a real thing, a winning attention strategy. They also plan to do some classroom training in addition to, in my language, the facilitated group reimagining strategy with particular groups and departments to illustrate the power of using the new tools. Clearly, with a smaller organization, and particularly if the geographical distribution is not all that great, you have the opportunity to work more directly with people than you do in larger organizations, or you more easily have a way of working with more people one-to-one or in small groups than you do in larger organizations. And I guess the other thing to say for both small organizations and large ones is that the use of the embedded champion strategy gives you the opportunity and ability to start spreading the learning out into the business units and to give people that have high credibility in those business units sufficient capabilities and skills to help their teams, their groups, make better use of the capabilities.
Great. Okay, so moving on, we have a question related to culture. So that the question specific. Yes, and if so, how do you mitigate that risk? So when I read this question is, there are certain cultures that are not necessarily open by nature. So what has your experience been related to encouraging maybe a closed-minded culture to become a more open kind of enterprise social culture?
Sure. Okay, so there's two ways that I want to answer that question, and I'll state them here because I'm probably going to forget the second as I start talking about the first. So the first is I want to talk about your culture question specifically, and then I want to talk about the difference between culture and work practice. So if I forget the second, Jason, you'll have to remind me. So in terms of culture specifically, I often hear, you know, our culture is the problem, and culture and collaboration is often put together, and my sense is that the culture question is often brought up as a conversation stopper. It would never fly in our culture, let's not do anything. And I think it's true that if people hate each other and can't work effectively in person, then it's likely that it's going to be a struggle to work together in other ways. And in such poisonous cultural environments, then you need to find other leverage points in order to bring about change to that culture. And often that's going to be through senior executives or managers starting to bring about a new way of working, a new level of openness, demonstrating at an interpersonal level trust in other people, and those small ripples can start to make a difference in the culture. But it's going to be a journey that takes some time. So yes, very clearly, cultural affinity to things like openness and transparency are going to have an impact on the success of enterprise social networking and collaboration environments and organizations. The second thing, I didn't forget, the second thing is a difference between culture and work practice. And this is a model that I didn't talk about today, but is in the User Adoption Strategies book. And it says that culture is made up of 4 different elements, one of which is work practice. And you have an opportunity using this model to say things like, we have a particular culture in the organization, a set of norms, a set of ways of working together today. So for example, in a document review, the cultural norm might be an author, the lead author creates a document and works on that, and then goes out for review and comment, and the work practice is that we distribute that via an attachment to an email. In order to start making a change to the culture and introducing new ways of working, you could approach this work practice question and say, instead of sending it out by email, we'll keep the same cultural norms, we'll keep the same cultural values that we'll ask you for your input, and we'll respect your input. But instead of sending out by email, we're now going to put it in a SharePoint team site. We'll send a link out. You check out, check in when you're done, and we'll work from it from here. So that is a way of respecting the cultural norms and values and expectations in the organizations, but still introducing a change to the work practice. Now, as a result of doing that, you may start to have an upward change in terms of those other things, that now instead of me being unable to see contributions from other people in progress of me making my comments in the document, I now start to see those. And I go, actually, the culture that we have is partly driven by the technology that we've had, partly constrained by the technology that we've had, and new ways of working can bring about a change to those things. Does that help?
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. So just to reiterate, there are other ways of not necessarily sidestepping culture, but kind of supplementing culture by altering the work practices.
Yes, I mean, culture is the kind of topic that we could talk about for a week. So, whatever I'm going to say in this, 3-minute soundbite is never going to be enough. It's a big topic. It's a topic that needs discussion. It does have an impact. There are some things you can do.
Perfect. Okay, so one thing that I wanted to note is that Neudesic is actually offering a complimentary copy of Michael's book, The User Adoption Strategies, which is what he was talking about here today for the first 20 folks that sign up for an on-premise trial of Neudesic Pulse. So if you can go out to, if you're interested in that, go ahead and go out to neudesicpulse.com and then click the Try It Now link, and you'll receive a copy of that book, and we'll reach out to you and begin a conversation. There was one final question. We have about 3 minutes, and I'm just going to go ahead and get this last question in here, and it's related to, are there any specific strategies looks like for gathering executive sponsorship, and how, what is that? Oh, and how involved should those executive sponsors be? So I guess it's a two-part question. Are there specific strategies for gaining executive sponsorship? And then how involved should they be throughout this process?
Seen as a consequence of using the new technology and approach, rather than approaching executive and seeking permission to introduce a new technology. So what I mean by that is, if you've been working with project teams, for example, you've helped them move away from multiple tools for running projects to a new integrated tool, and you've got an exemplar story from that. Hey, as a result of working with 10 project teams in the organization, we've seen that elapsed time decreases by 20% or something. Or, much better coherence about what's going on. Taking that and saying to an executive, we want to do more of this, we want to decrease elapsed time on projects across the organization, is a much more effective way of getting executive support than saying, can we roll out SharePoint? Is that all right? So, again, there's a whole presentation that looks at this in terms of mindset and approach and things like that. But that would be the snippet that I'd highlight.
All right, perfect. We look forward to bringing you more of these options, to all of our customers as well as to the community at large. So thanks again for participating, and we look forward to sharing a future webcast with you. Have a good day.